Welcome back, everyone. I've got another game analysis for you. I'm going to be analyzing one of my classical chess games. This game was pretty short, but it features a really key concept that not a lot of players in my rating range know about. When we hear the term opposite colored bishops, we immediately think of the endgame and we think of drawish endgames. You could be up two, maybe even three pawns, and still it's theoretically drawn if the bishops are of opposite colors. But what you might not know is that there are actually some massive advantages to having opposite colored bishops, especially in the middle game. If you are the attacking side, opposite colored bishops are an absolute dream because your opponent's bishop cannot cover the squares that you're actually attacking. So, this is a concept that I'm going to show you right now in this game. I think this game is a fantastic example of how opposite colored bishops are perfection for the attacking side. I had the black pieces in this game, and I won't lie to you, it's a little outdated. I did play it a little over a year ago, but I think the concept of opposite colored bishop attacking is just too fundamental for me not to show it. So let's jump into the game. My opponent started with d4. I played d5, and here my opponent went bishop f4, so he's playing into the London system. So I went e6, and after e3, I played knight f6. This is all just sort of standard London system theory for the first few moves. Now my opponent played bishop d3, and I went c5. We're trying to strike back in the center, attack this d4 pawn. So as such, my opponent plays c3 to support it. Now I played knight c6, just developing another piece. My opponent goes knight d2. He's eventually going to bring his other knight to f3, and this is sort of the general structure for white for the London system. So I respond with bishop d6. We want to challenge this bishop on f4. Most of the time, white just plays bishop g3, but sometimes they will bring their knight to e2 so they can recapture with the knight. My opponent just played bishop g3 here. This is kind of the standard London system wisdom. Whenever bishop d6 is played, just drop your bishop back to g3. And now if black ever takes, you'll take back with the h-pawn, and you'll have this open file here. So here I just castled, just simple development. My opponent brought his other knight out to f3, and now I played b6. Another move here is queen e7, but I like b6 because we'll fianchetto this bishop, and I think this is a more challenging line for black. So my opponent played knight e5. Again, this is a very common idea in the London to stick this knight on e5. Black has some trouble getting rid of this knight. We can't take with our knight because then the pawn will take back and it will fork both of our pieces. So this knight on e5 is actually well defended, and sometimes in the London, white will even castle and play f4 to provide extra support to e5 and just absolutely clamp down on this square. There's no good way to dislodge this knight, so for the time being, I just played bishop b7. I said, let's finalize our development first, and then we'll figure out how to proceed and how to deal with this knight on e5. And fortunately for me, my opponent actually made a one-move blunder. So he played bishop h4, which just undefends his knight on e5, so I took the opportunity to take it. He took back with the pawn, and now I won this pawn on e5. So now we're just a pawn up, and we don't actually have any problem on e5 anymore. Here, my opponent went for a very aggressive move. He played f4, which attacks our bishop on e5, and the idea itself is sound. If white can castle, then he'll have his rook on f1, and he'll be able to just shove this f-pawn down our throats and try to crash through on the king side. That being said, this move is very double-edged because it creates some weaknesses in my opponent's position. Pushing this f-pawn now means that if my opponent castles kingside, then his king is going to be much more exposed, especially on this diagonal. Separately, this e3 pawn is now backwards, so this can be a long-term weakness for white. And additionally, he's also created this hole on e4, which isn't a problem now. He's got two pieces defending it, but potentially in the future, I'll be able to occupy this square and exert some extreme pressure on his position. Since my bishop was attacked, I played a simple move. I just dropped my bishop back, bishop d6, and as I mentioned before, I thought my opponent was going to castle kingside, have his rook on f1, and try to crash through on the king side and really test my defensive skills. But I actually lucked out, and he played bishop takes f6, and I was able to take back with the queen. Now I've got the bishop pair, and I'm also up a pawn. I've got a solid pawn structure, so we have a big advantage here. Now my opponent goes queen h5. He's creating a checkmating threat on h7. But this is kind of a one-move threat. We can play g6 like we did in the game, kick the queen away, and never have to worry about that checkmate threat on h7 again. So here my opponent plays queen e2, and now I went for a thematic move. When you have the bishop pair, you want to open up as many lines, as many diagonals as you can. Bishops love open diagonals because it increases their scope. So I played the move d4 here. The engine actually preferred this move e5 instead of d4. This move is again the same theme. We're trying to open up more diagonals for our bishop, and if the pawn takes, then we'll take back with our bishop. And again, these bishops are opening up, the position's opening up a little bit more, so our pieces are getting a little bit stronger, and our opponent's pawn structure is very weak here. I didn't see this idea specifically, so I went with d4, and I thought this was a very nice move. In the game, my opponent played bishop e4. I thought this was very nice. Now, what I don't want to do is I don't want to take this bishop, because then my opponent will take back with the knight. I'll have to drop back with the queen, and after he takes my other bishop, I'll still be up a pawn, but we've just lost one of our main advantages, which was the bishop pair. So this isn't as advantageous of a position as what we could have had. Instead of this, I actually went for a really nice intermezzo. So instead of taking the bishop on e4, I actually played d takes e3. Now, if the bishop takes on b7, we're going to take this knight on d2 with check first, and after the queen recaptures, we will move our rook out of the way. Additionally, the queen cannot take on e3. If the queen takes on e3, then we will play bishop takes f4. We're hitting the queen, we're gaining another tempo, and we're doing very well in this position. This d takes e3 move was very strong, but the engine actually preferred bishop d5. This puts the bishop on a defended square. So now if white were to take it, we would take back with the pawn, and white is going to run into a lot of trouble here. On the next move, we're going to bring a rook to e8, and this is going to exert a ton of pressure on the position. This lines up the rook against this pawn, the queen, and the king, and I think this pawn is most definitely going to fall in the position. Separately, if our opponent were simply to castle, then we would take this pawn on c3, and after our opponent takes back, our position is very solid. This pawn on c3 is about to fall, and black is just doing very well here. I didn't see this idea though, so I played d takes e3, which again is still a very strong move. My opponent went for bishop takes b7, so I continued with my plan. I took the knight on d2 with check, and after my opponent took back with the queen, I actually found a move that I didn't see before, but I realized that it does gain a tempo, so I played bishop takes f4, which attacks the queen, even though it leaves our rook hanging. Our opponent has to respond because his queen is under attack. So our opponent played queen e2, and now I moved my rook to d8, getting the rook to safety and also controlling this open file here. Here my opponent castled, he's getting his king to safety, finishing his development, and as you can see, we've got these opposite colored bishops here. So our opponent's king is very exposed on these dark squares, and given that we have the dark squared bishop, what we're hoping to do is exert tons of pressure on that color complex and maybe even be able to checkmate quickly. Here I play the move queen e5. This offers a queen trade and actually really forces a queen trade. If our opponent's queen moves anywhere, then we're going to take on h2, and this king is going to be horribly exposed. Our opponent actually played queen a6. Perhaps he didn't realize the power of these opposite colored bishops. Now I responded with the move bishop takes h2 check. In the game, my opponent played king h1. He has to move to h1. If the king goes to f2, then I would play rook d2 check, and if the queen blocks, we would take with the queen. The queen covers all of these squares and delivers check, and the bishop covers from behind, so this would be checkmate. Separately, if the king goes to f3, then we play queen f4. This is checkmate. The queen covers all of these squares, delivers check, and the rook covers from behind. So the king actually has to move to h1 here. Now I played a really quiet move. It's very nice, but it's a very quiet move. I just played bishop g3, just tucking the bishop back and preparing this threat of queen h5 check, and after the king moves, we would play queen h2 checkmate. So you can see the power of these opposite colored bishops already. This king is completely trapped on h2 and f2, specifically because we've got the dark squared bishop and we're exerting all of this pressure on this color complex. So my opponent played bishop f3. He wants to stop our threat of queen h5, so he has to bring his bishop back to cover that square. And now I played rook d2. Instead of rook d2, a better move actually would have been queen f4 or queen g5. This renews the threat that we had of checking on the h-file with the queen and then delivering mate on h2. You can see there's mate and 8. I don't know how I missed mate and 8 moves. I mean, it's just an unforgivable mistake, I'll say it. So I played rook d2. I missed the idea. And after my opponent played rook b1, defending this b2 pawn, I actually did see the idea, and I played queen g5. Now this threat of playing queen h6 or queen h4 is pretty unstoppable. Having this rook on d2 I thought was also very helpful because it completely cuts the king off. The king is completely trapped on the first rank, and additionally we've got this bishop that covers all of these dark squares. So in this position, my opponent actually resigned. And as you can see, this is the beauty of opposite colored bishops in attacking middle game positions. I've got the dark squared bishop, and I am exerting incredible pressure along these dark squares. My opponent's king is completely trapped, and unfortunately, the fact that he only has a light squared bishop means that he cannot defend himself on this color complex. Theoretically, if he wanted to start controlling these dark squares, he'd have to sacrifice a rook for our bishop. Now, this obviously isn't even possible in this position, but this just goes to show you that theoretically and practically, this idea of opposite colored bishops when you're the one attacking in the middle game is perfection. It is the absolute dream, and it's something that you absolutely need to take advantage of when you have it. Do not just trade down and get into an endgame with opposite colored bishops, because then it's going to be a draw. Push yourself in that position when you have the attack to exert maximum pressure on that color complex. I hope you found this video informative. I remember after I played this game, my opponent and I did a post-mortem game analysis, and he found this concept of opposite colored bishop middle game attacking very enlightening. It really is one of those pieces of chess wisdom that you just need to know, and once you know it and start to implement it, it kind of just becomes second nature. So now that you've seen it, hopefully you can start to use it in your own games and crush your opponents. If you enjoyed this game, then be sure to subscribe. I post a new classical chess analysis every Thursday, and I've also got a playlist already of the other two games that I've analyzed in the description below, so go check those out as well.